You guys have all been asking me for some more book recommendations. In the past few videos that I've made, I've brought up a lot of books, and that's why for this video, we're going to be talking about 4 books, 4 photographers, each of them with something distinct that they saw throughout the world that many people in their time period walked right by. Each of them finding a way to slow down time, to create their own worlds, and to do it long enough to make all of us stop and look with them. Hi, my name is Jared Thomas Tapey. I'm a social documentary photographer and educator here in New York City, and you're watching my YouTube channel. Across my social media platforms, I've created 6 different segments, each of which discuss something specific within the medium of photography. Crafting a photograph, life through the lens, marks of the maker, tools of the trade, the creative connection, and field notes. And in today's lesson, we're going to be taking from my segment, Life Through the Lens, which is all about the history of photography and its most prolific photographers and what we can learn from them today. That's why today's video, we're going to be spending a little time with 4 amazing books from 4 different photographers from the latest release of the Thames and Hudson series this summer. If you followed me on anything like my Instagram, you've seen that I've been putting out videos with them for the past few weeks now, and this is going to be a complete review of all of the new books for this season. I was very happy to be working with Thames and Hudson again because they're one of my favorite photography book sellers. And this season was just a remarkable look at the history of photography and some new artists. So without further ado, let's jump right in. We're going to be starting with the new Helen Levitt book that's been published by Thames and Hudson. Now, Helen Levitt is one of my favorite photographers. I really look up to her. She was one of the first photographers that I really studied when it came to street photography. She dropped out of high school at 17 and she had no formal training, no connections, no money for equipment. She was born and raised in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, in a city that was still figuring out what it was at the time. And yet, Helen Levitt became, in the words of one critic, the most celebrated and least known photographer of her time. Now, the funny thing is that she was celebrated by the photographers that knew her. Walker Evans said that she was one of only 3 photographers who had something truly original to say, yet she was unknown by most people in the public. She had a really interesting upbringing because in 1931, Levitt was working for a commercial photographer up in the Bronx. It was a $6 a week job, and she spent most of the time in the darkroom, developing other people's pictures and such. At the time, she was only 18 years old. But the darkroom taught her something essential. That's because she learned how light behaves and the techniques of dodging and burning, and looking at all of these different images from different photographers allowed her to understand composition and story. So in a way, she was absorbing the technique of the people that she was learning from before actually going out and doing it herself. And that vision that she ended up having would be developed a little bit later and in a very unlikely circumstance. It really kind of started in April of 1935 at the Julienne Levy Gallery here in Manhattan. That's where she encountered an exhibition of photographers. Within that gallery was a young French photographer by the name of none other than Henri Cartier-Bresson. Now, Cartier-Bresson at the time was documenting Mexico, but you know, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know I love Henri Cartier-Bresson. It's just something about his geometry and the timing, of course, the decisive moment. Looking at his work really reoriented everything else within Helen Levitt's life at the time. She didn't say a single thing to him at the gallery, though. She was intimidated. She was later quoted by saying that he was such an intellectual, highly educated. I was a high school dropout. But she went back. She would later meet him at the Manhattan Film and Photography League, where she would then accompany him while photographing up in the Bronx. Then the following year, after saving up enough money from her $6 a week job, she bought her first Leica. Fast forward 3 years, 1938. Levitt took her portfolio to another photographer that was showing in the same gallery as Henri Cartier-Bresson during that time period. That would be none other than Walker Evans. At this point, she was 24. He was 10 years her senior, and already one of the most important photographers in all of America. She showed him her pictures, and Evans was struck. He would later in his career go on to say that he felt that the only 3 photographers that ever had anything original to say was himself, Henri Cartier-Bresson, and Helen Levitt. Then he invited her to assist him, not as a darkroom technician, but as an actual collaborator. She made prints for his landmark 1938 American photographs that was exhibited here at the Museum of Modern Art. Through Evans, she met the writer James Agee. This group of 3, James, Walker, and Helen. would end up shaping each other's work for the next 2 decades. But what was she actually photographing? What was that subject that Walker Evans, one of the most notorious photographers in the history of photography, what was so original about her work? That would be nothing else, of course, than the streets of New York City. Specifically, the streets of East Harlem, the Lower East Side, and the Garment District. The working class neighborhoods where people lived their lives outdoors because in the 1930s and 40s, before air conditioning, before television, that's where life happened. In doorways, on stoops, and chalk drawings on pavement. Children were her greatest subject. But it was a lot different than the kind of photography that a lot of other photographers were partaking in when it came to children at the time. This was during the 30s and 40s. There was a lot of stuff going on in the world. Helen Levitt really had no interest in that. Instead, she photographed children playing, lost in games that adults couldn't see. She photographed chalk drawings that kids made on the sidewalks with the same seriousness that a curator might bring to a gallery wall, because to her, I think she thought they deserved it. Her first book was produced in the 1940s. It was titled A Way of Seeing, but it wasn't released until 1965. Then in 1941, Helen Levitt did something completely uncharacteristic, and she left New York City. She had been invited to accompany a trip to Mexico City. For a woman who rarely traveled, who found most of her subjects within walking distance of wherever she was living, this was a very significant departure. The photographs that she made in the streets of Tacubaya, a working class suburb of Mexico City, are extraordinary. It's a completely different landscape than the landscape here in New York City. Architecture is different, children are different, and yet instinct is identical. She's got the same warmth, the same sense of having caught something that was passing. They're among the most complete expressions of her vision, and they represent the only time she photographed outside of the United States. From the mid-1940s, Helen Levitt kind of stepped back from still photography for a while, and instead she became interested in film and moving images. She co-directed In the Street in 1952. She spent nearly an entire decade in the film industry before photography called her back. When she returned to photography in the late 1950s, she did something else really unexpected. She applied for a Guggenheim Fellowship. Now, if you don't know what a Guggenheim Fellowship is, it's essentially what allowed Robert Frank to travel the United States and create The Americans. The crazy thing is she received it twice, and it was received for something that wasn't really accepted that much in the photography community at the time, and that's working in color. Crazy thing is that Walker Evans, right, he described working in color as vulgar, and the photographic industry largely agreed with him. That's because at the time, color was for things like advertising and magazines, snapshots, not for art. But Helen Levitt disagreed, and so she set out to prove it. The color photographs she produced in 1959 and 1960 are among some of the most beautiful images in the history of the medium. The same streets, the same people, but now the yellow of a dress, the red of a sign, the blue shadow on a pavement. These became compositional elements as important as any gesture of expression. She was one of the earliest American photographers to treat color as an artistic language rather than a reproduction tool. And then in 1970, somebody broke into her apartment on East 12th Street and stole them. Almost an entire archive of color work, from the Guggenheim projects to her other personal work. Years of slides and prints and negatives, all gone. It was never recovered. What survived was shown at the Museum of Modern Art in 1974. And what survives today is only a fraction of what there actually was. Now, I think that if you know Helen Levitt, we all know that she's awesome, and she continued to photograph until her 80s. She was an enigma. She rarely gave interviews. She couldn't care less about the press. She never taught. She didn't really care about courting some sort of recognition. She lived pretty quietly alone with her cat Blinky. She died in her sleep March 29th, 2009. She was 95 years old. And this book, published by Thames and Hudson, accompanying her first ever touring exhibition drawn from her complete archive, is the most comprehensive account of her work ever produced. 304 pages, 356 images, black and white and color, early work, Mexico, the subway, the streets, the late photographs, all of it. Helen Levitt spent 60 years photographing one city. She didn't try to document its politics or its poverty or its power. She documented its people, their gestures, their games, their unguarded moments, and she did it with such an honesty and such genius that the photographs feel less like history and more like an evidence of living. Evidence that all of this has happened, that they were here. That's why I think this book is phenomenal. Which brings me to my second book of this collection, Sisters, Saints, and Sibyls by Nan Goldin. Now, if you don't know who Nan Goldin is, she's a fantastic photographer. All of these photographers are fantastic. Except she's just a little bit different because it's extremely personal. This work is so relentless into the real world of Nan Goldin. But before we talk about Nan Goldin, we gotta talk about Barbara. Barbara Holly Goldin was born in Washington, D.C. in 1946. She was 7 years older than her sister Nan. By all accounts, she was a precocious child. When Nan was 5, the two of them ran away together to join the circus. But at the age of 12, Barbara was institutionalized. She was in and out of psychiatric facilities for the next 6 years. Barbara Goldin was given a day pass from the hospital. That's where she stepped in front of a commuter train in Silver Spring, Maryland. She was 18 years old. Nan was 11, and she was told it was an accident, but she knew it wasn't. That's why it's so important to understand who Barbara is so that you can better understand Nan Goldin's life and the work that she produced, because the loss of Barbara defined everything else in Nan's life after that. Nan Goldin left the house at age 13, frightened that she would find Barbara's fate in herself. She would live in a bunch of different foster homes in the Boston area, enrolled in an alternative school in Massachusetts. But it was there that she found a community, misfits and artists and people within the queer community. Then at 16, a teacher gave her a camera in one of her classes. This was at 1969. It was a Polaroid. Goldin immediately became obsessed with documenting her life. It's when she moved to Boston with her friend David Armstrong. It's where she discovered the drag community, all the underground clubs, and how a family could be shaped and formed instead of just being stuck with the one that you're born with. Now, she wanted to be a fashion photographer. She wanted to put these people that she now had a connection with and put them on the cover of Vogue. And I think it's that desire that allowed her to photograph the people that she was closest with such an incredible intimacy. And that's really the power of Nan Goldin's work. She wrote in those early years, "I started to shoot dope and shoot pictures. That saved my life." Without Barbara, Nan had said that there would be no Ballad of Sexual Dependency, another one of her projects. There might not have even been a Nan Goldin at all. Through the late 1970s and the 80s, Goldin documented her work with a camera in the way that other people kept diaries. Her images of her friends in bathrooms and bars in the aftermath of violence and love and addiction formed the slideshow that became the Ballad of Sexual Dependency, first shown in nightclubs in downtown New York, and eventually published as a book in 1986. Now, the ballad is the work that made her famous, but it's also the work that's got to be understood in the context of what shaped it and what happened before it. And that would be Barbara and what she was trying not to forget. And then the AIDS epidemic arrived. Through the early and mid-80s, Goldin watched her friends die. The community she had built her life and her art around was being destroyed. She photographed the deaths and the hospital beds. She photographed her friends' faces the days before they were gone. And I think that's because photographs were the only way that she could make a memory of them. In 1988, Goldin went into rehab. That's because she was using heroin for years. Her friends were dying of AIDS. She decided to go to rehab because someone had asked her, how can you be killing yourself when your friends around you are dying? And that got her to check in. When she came out, the world that she had been photographing was largely gone. But she kept on going. And in 2004, she returned to something that she had been circling for 40 years. And that was the death of her sister, Barbara. Sisters, Saints, and Sibyls was first presented as a 3-screen slide installation in Paris in 2004. Set to music, Nick Cave, Leonard Cohen, Johnny Cash. It was 30 minutes of images, documents, and a narrative, a meditation of Barbara's life and death, and the aftershock that had been reverberated through Goldin's entire existence. First published as a book in 2005, it's now reissued by Thames and Hudson in 2026 to coincide with Goldin's major career retrospective at the Grand Palais in Paris. I think it's probably the most important book that Nan Goldin's ever made. What makes it so extraordinary to me is the structure. Goldin weaves together three very different kinds of image making. First, you got her father's amateur family snapshots from the 1940s and 50s. Then, the institutional documents that chart Barbara's official story, hospital reports, psychiatric assessments, a register of orphans, and her own photographs taken in decades later. I think, placed side by side, these three sources reveal just how devastating the world of photography can be and what it can unravel. A lesson that I think every new photographer should learn about. You can see the clinical records dehumanizing Barbara entirely. I mean, she's described not as a person, but as a set of symptoms, a set of behaviors that required management. You see the photographs, her father's amateur snapshots, Goldin's own images, insist on her humanity. They insist on her as a person, as a child, and as a sister. Goldin has said that this is the argument at the core of her entire practice. Who controls the image controls the narrative. Barbara's life was documented exhaustively by the institutions that held her, but those documents existed to justify containment, not to understand a person. The photographs in this book resist that, and they demand a different kind of attention. Nan Goldin, now at 72 years old, remains one of the most important photographers and throughout the entire medium of photography. The retrospective, this book, is like the largest survey of her work to date. Sister Saints and Sibyls is 144 pages, 150 images. It's a small book in physical terms, smaller than the others in this collection for sure, but it carries more weight per page than almost anything else you can hold in your hands. It begins with the myth of Saint Barbara, a Christian martyr imprisoned in a tower by her own father, beheaded for defying her parents' beliefs. It draws a line from that myth to Barbara Goldin, institutionalized at 12 by a family in a medical establishment that had no room for her. It refuses to look away from any of that. I think that one of the most prominent parts of this book is that Nan dedicated the entirety of it to all of the women that have committed suicide or been institutionalized just for who they are. And I think what's really important about that is that in 1965, when Barbara died, that dedication would have been almost unspeakable. We've come so far since then, but it feels like now it's more necessary than ever. Now, I want to switch gears a little bit and let's go to our next artist. We've spent the first two segments of this video talking about a very different type of photographer. They dedicated their lives to documenting the real world. Helen Levitt's New York City streets, Nan Goldin's raw intimacy, both of them committed to showing the world as it is in their own ways. But now we're going to talk about one of my new favorite photographers and artists, one that I wasn't entirely familiar with before working with Thames and Hudson. And I'm very thankful that I got the opportunity to learn about this artist and speak to this artist, and that would be Brooke DiDonato. The really interesting thing about Brooke DiDonato is that she spent 4 years learning to do exactly what Helen Levitt did and exactly what Nan Goldin did, learning about how to document things in the real world. But then she spent the next decade taking it all apart. Brooke was born in 1990 in Ohio. It's important to know the aspects of how she grew up, because she grew up in these sort of post-war houses, and that America has kind of become so well known for, that sort of cliche. The floral wallpapers and the pastel colors. You know, the houses where you walk into a new room and it's like you're in a completely different world from the rest of the house. And her grandmother's house was particularly vivid. Each room built around a meticulous color story. But what's interesting is that Ohio, and the kind of domestic space that Ohio represents, isn't just like a backdrop to DiDonato's work. It is the subject. It's like the thing that she keeps returning to. Now, the interesting thing is that Brooke went to Kent State. And funny enough, she studied photojournalism. So she was trained to document the world in a more objective manner. She wanted to be a witness, to get out of the way, let the facts speak for themselves. And then she graduated in 2012. She started to develop her own work. She was one of the first on Flickr, which in 2011 and 2012 was still a very genuine and real photography community. But what she was making wasn't photojournalism. It was something entirely different. Bodies folding in the furniture, figures subsumed by landscapes, and domestic spaces that appear to be kind of consuming their inhabitants. She later would say that she wouldn't know know whether to call herself a surrealist or not. It's because when she looked at her work, it didn't really feel surreal. That's because it, for the most part, was all based in reality. I think that's kind of what interested me, is the uncanny aspect of her work. They really look like reality, and that's because they're constructed with painstaking accuracy, and yet they look impossible. The breakthrough series was called A House Is Not a Home. Shot in the suburban Ohio home that she grew up in, and it depicts women or parts of women in states of strange containment. Figure pressed into a corner that shouldn't fit a body, a woman whose legs disappeared into the floor as if the carpet itself has begun to absorb her, legs extended from an attic hatch. What's interesting is that Donato has talked about being influenced by Charlotte Perkins Gilman's 1892 short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, a story about a woman confined in a room, driven slowly mad by the pattern on the walls. But Donato's approach is not solemn. Instead, it's strange and slightly funny and unsettling, often simultaneously. One of the things that distinguishes Donato's work from most of the other surrealist photography you see online is that there's very minimal digital manipulation. Every image is constructed in camera, in the real world, through staging. What's really cool is that you can see some of it in the back of the book, how they constructed the images. But I mean, what that means is like so much work. And I think that as I've grown older in this medium, I've really started to appreciate just how much time goes into constructing something like this. I mean, this means scouting locations, building sets, learning how to work with architecture, understanding color and compositional elements. Donato's color palette is soft and very specific, pastels and muted hues, nothing too harsh. The comfort of the colors is part of the discomfort of the image. The world that she's constructed looks pleasant, but it doesn't work the way the world is supposed to work. The monograph, her debut, published by Thames and Hudson this year in 2026, brings together not just A House Is Not a Home, but the full range of her practice, her outdoor work, which takes the same uncanny logic into extreme American landscapes, cornfields, deserts, white picket fences, figures subsumed by nature in the way that other figures are subsumed by domestic spaces. There's also new works published in here in print for the first time, images that haven't appeared in any previous exhibition or publication. The book also includes an introduction by arts writer Eleanor Sutherland and a remarkable conversation between filmmaker Eve Van Dyke and Donato's own father, Bob Donato, personal account of watching his daughter develop from a child who wanted to draw into the artist she became today. Now, what's really awesome to see is that Donato's work has been commercially accepted in ways that a lot of surrealist photography doesn't always get to manage. But what I find really admirable is that sometimes this type of commercial work in an artist's career can kind of dilute the vision. Maybe it's not really by the artist specifically, but by other people. And we've seen this a little bit already. The language gets copied, it gets flattened, somebody else does a different reiteration of it. But the thing that's different is that Donato's work, what Brooke's work does, is that it has a depth that just can't be replicated. I think that's because the surrealism that you see here isn't just aesthetic. It's more so psychological, it's about something. And the monograph makes that argument more fully and more clearly than any individual image or campaign could. 224 pages, 167 color images. The book itself is large, and the images, they need that space. Donato's compositions breathe on the page in a way that can't be on screen. It blends nostalgia, humor, and unease. The nostalgia comes from the domestic spaces, the colors, the American suburb aesthetic that's almost reassuring in its familiarity. The humor comes from the titles, the deadpan absurdity of the images. The unease is what remains when you notice the uncanniness of the people within the frame and how isolating that feeling can create. The title of the book itself, Take a Picture, It'll Last Longer, is borrowed from a phrase, you say to someone who's staring at you. Brooke Donato turns it into a dare. Stare as long as you like. She put it there on purpose. Which brings us to our last book in this collection this season by Thames and Hudson, which is Harry Gruyaert, New York. Harry Gruyaert was born in Antwerp, Belgium in 1941 into a strict Catholic family in a country he would later describe as completely without color. This is weird because his father worked in film production but considered art a sin. Photography specifically was forbidden. But Harry knew from a very young age that There was nothing he wanted to do more than photography. So at 21, as soon as he could, he left. He moved to Paris in 1962. He studied photography and filmmaking, and he worked as the director for photography for Flemish television. And from 1970 to 1972, he lived in London. This was in 1972 at the time when color TV was still kind of like a novelty. Before London, there was New York. Gruyaert first visited in 1968 when a French filmmaker named François Reinbach invited him to photograph on the set of a film. He stayed for like 2 or 3 months in a building in Soho. He walked into a gallery that was showing pop art. So, you know, Roy Lichtenstein, Robert Rauschenberg, artists who had been taking the visual language of American commerce, billboards, packaging, advertising, and then kind of reframed it all as art. What had been interesting is that some of the earliest work of Gruyaert was in Belgium, and it was all in black and white. It was a very dull place. And I think it was then, after seeing that pop art gallery and staying in New York City, you could see the color could transform the commonplace into something else entirely. In 1969, Gruyaert made his first trip to Morocco. He described Morocco as kind of like a revelation. From that point on, he committed entirely to color photography. This was a very radical thing to kind of try and accomplish because, much like Helen Levitt in 30s and 40s, color photography in the 70s still wasn't really mainstream. Black and white was still the serious language of the medium. Again, color was kind of for tourism and snapshots and marketing and commercials. When Gruyaert joined Magnum in 1982, he and Alex Webb were among the very few non-commercial photographers working in color. And some of his colleagues in the Magnum collective were incredibly skeptical of his work. Raymond Depardon, one of the most respected documentary photographers in Europe, said of Gruyaert, he thinks in frames in color. That was a compliment, but it was also acknowledging just how odd he was for that time. Now, as a Magnum photographer, Gruyaert spent years traveling. India, Morocco, Egypt, Ireland, Russia, Belgium, Japan, France, the United States. And his books track these journeys. Morocco, India, Made in Belgium, Rivages, Last Call. Each one to look into how a sustained practice of light and studying color all operate in specific places. Now, what's very interesting about Gruyaert compared to a lot of other Magnum photographers or heavy hitters during that time period is that he wasn't really interested in events. He really wasn't even interested in people or like drawing a certain narrative. What he was interested in was what happens when color and light align. So you could say that he kind of photographs processes rather than results. These sort of moments caught in transition. The book that we're looking at today gathers 50 years of Gruyaert's returns to New York from 1969 to 2017, from the early Soho days when the building he was living in was being transformed into the first artist co-op in the neighborhood, through decades of Magnum assignments and personal visits to the digital era. What's striking about seeing this work collected in a single volume is how the city changes and how Gruyaert's attention to it doesn't. The neon gets brighter, the buildings get taller, the demographics shift, the visual noise of the street becomes more intense, and Gruyaert responds to all of it in the same way, by finding within the noise an arrangement of color and light and human presence that justifies the exposure. What's really interesting to me as somebody who's so focused on the people within the images, I'm all about human connection and all about emotion and the people within the frame. Harry doesn't think about that whatsoever. It's more so like a combination of things, the color, the rhythm, which explains why his photographs feel cinematic in a way that's distinct from any documentary tradition. They're not necessarily about the person in the frame, they're about what the person contributes to the frame. The red of a coat against a blue wall, the way a shadow falls across a diner window, the geometry of a crowd at a crossing. This is without a doubt the largest book in the season's collection. Gruyaert's photos need scale. They're designed to be encountered at a size where the color can breathe and where the composition can reveal itself, where the viewer has more room to actually enter the image rather than observe it from a distance. Each photograph is presented across either a double-page spread or single-page spread. No caption within the image, no interference, just the picture and then the next picture and the rhythm that builds between them as you turn the pages. Harry's 84 years old. He lives in Paris. And he is, in the estimation of many people who study the medium of photography, one of the most important European photographers to ever grace the medium. He's also one of my personal favorite photographers. This book is a chance to spend time with 50 years of work presented at the scale and with the care it deserves. Together, 4 photographers, 4 amazing books. 4 completely different ways of looking at the world, and 4 completely different ways on why photography matters. Helen Levitt, who believed that a street could be a theater and that children were its greatest performers. Nan Goldin, who understood that the camera isn't neutral, that every choice about what to photograph and how to present it is an ethical act. Brooke, who takes that American domestic world and finds, hiding inside it, something impossible. And Harry Gruyaert, who spent 50 years proving that color isn't decoration. Links to each one are in the description below, and if you spent this time here with me today, there's a good chance you care about photography as much as I do. So I appreciate you all for being here, and I hope that these books make it on your shelves because they are absolutely magnificent. That's going to be it for today's video and this episode of Life Through the Lens. I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that you consider picking up some of these books. I absolutely adore them. For now, get out there, get shooting, keep moving forward. I'll catch you on the next one.